The first thing the human noticed was that every conversation in the room stopped at exactly the same moment. It didn't happen loudly. There was no gasp, no sudden shout, no dramatic announcement echoing through the chamber. It was subtler than that. A ripple of silence moved across the hall like a wave gliding over water, beginning near the great entrance arch and spreading outward through clusters of diplomats, officers, nobles, and emissaries, until it reached even the far balcony where Ethan Cole stood holding a glass of something that looked like wine but faintly glowed blue. Ethan noticed the silence before he realized the reason for it. He turned slightly, following the direction of everyone else's gaze, and immediately wished he hadn't. The grand pavilion of Elendra Prime was already overwhelming enough for a human who had spent most of his life fixing satellite relays and malfunctioning navigation arrays in Earth's orbit. The ceiling arched hundreds of meters overhead, formed from a translucent crystalline material that revealed the violet sky of Elendra beyond it. Massive floating lanterns drifted slowly through the air like silent jellyfish, casting soft silver light over the polished floor. Along the walls, towering alien sculptures depicted ancient battles between star empires, their surfaces alive with faintly shifting holographic patterns. And everywhere Ethan looked there were aliens. Most of them looked almost human. Almost, they were taller on average, their posture too graceful to be entirely natural. Many had faintly luminous skin that shimmered subtly beneath the lantern light. Their eyes tended toward unusual colors, violet, silver, pale gold, and some possessed long, elegantly pointed ears that curved slightly backward along the skull. Their clothing flowed like liquid metal or woven starlight. It made Ethan feel like someone had accidentally dropped a mechanic into the middle of a royal opera. Which, in a way, was exactly what had happened. He adjusted the collar of the formal diplomatic jacket someone from the Elendran embassy had insisted he wear. It still didn't quite fit his shoulders. "Relax, human," a voice beside him said dryly. Ethan glanced sideways. The speaker was Ambassador Velkari of the Thesran Coalition, a tall alien woman with smooth, copper-colored skin and softly glowing eyes that reminded Ethan of molten amber. She was watching the room with mild amusement. "You look like a prey animal that wandered into a room full of predators," she added. "I'm a satellite technician," Ethan muttered. "Predators make more sense than this." Velkari chuckled quietly. "That is diplomacy." Ethan took a cautious sip of the glowing drink. "What is this, by the way?" "Fermented starfruit. It's sparkling. It is alive." Ethan froze mid-sip. Velkari smiled. "Relax, only mildly." Ethan slowly lowered the glass. "I miss coffee," he said. Velkari was about to respond when the silence sweeping across the room reached them. Both of them turned. At the far end of the pavilion, the massive crystalline doors had opened. Several Elendran royal guards entered first. They were unmistakable, tall figures clad in polished white armor that seemed grown rather than forged. Thin energy spears rested in their hands, the tips glowing faintly with contained power. Their helmets were open, revealing calm faces with pale luminous skin and eyes that shone faint violet. The guards spread outward through the room with silent precision. Then she entered. Even Ethan, who knew almost nothing about Elendran politics, understood instantly that whoever she was, she mattered. She moved with the kind of calm confidence that made entire rooms unconsciously shift to accommodate her presence. Her silver hair fell down her back like liquid moonlight, and delicate crystalline branches were woven into it in the shape of a crown. Her skin carried the same faint luminescence common among Elendrans, but somehow brighter, as if light lived just beneath the surface. Her eyes were a deep glowing violet. Princess Saralith. Ethan had heard the name earlier that evening during one of the endless diplomatic introductions. Future heir to the Elendran imperial throne. Which meant that at this moment, Ethan Cole, Earth's least qualified guest, was standing in the same room as one of the most powerful individuals in known space. He instinctively looked away, which turned out to be the exact wrong decision. Because when he glanced back a moment later, her eyes were already on him. Not generally in his direction, directly on him. Ethan blinked. The princess had stopped walking. Around her, a group of elegant Elendran nobles had been speaking quietly, but their conversation faded as they noticed her pause. She was staring across the room. At him. Ethan looked behind himself, nothing there except a floating sculpture. He looked to his left. A pair of insected diplomats were whispering to each other nervously. He looked back at the princess, still staring. "Ambassador Velkari," Ethan said slowly, Why is the royal heir looking at me like I just insulted her grandmother? Velkari followed his gaze. The moment she saw who was standing at the entrance, her amused expression vanished. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, what?" "Oh, that wasn't reassuring." Across the pavilion, Princess Saralith continued studying the human. Not with anger, not with curiosity, something else. Recognition. The nobles beside her were beginning to notice her attention had locked onto someone across the room. One of them leaned closer. "Your Highness?" Saralith didn't answer immediately. Her violet eyes narrowed slightly as she observed the human standing awkwardly beside the Thesrin ambassador, holding a glass of glowing starfruit and looking increasingly uncomfortable. Ethan felt like a spotlight had turned on above his head. "Velkari," he whispered, "should I bow or something?" "You already missed the correct moment for that," she murmured. "Fantastic." Saralith finally spoke. Her voice carried easily through the quiet hall, not loud, just impossibly clear. "That one." Several nobles followed the direction of her gaze. They saw him, a human, average height, dark hair, standing awkwardly near the balcony railing while holding a suspiciously glowing beverage. Confusion rippled through the group. One noble tilted his head. "The human?" Saralith nodded once. Then, without hesitation, she turned calmly to the group beside her and said something that would later be repeated across 3-star systems by morning. "That's my husband." For a moment, no one in the pavilion reacted. Not because they hadn't heard, because their minds refused to process what they had. Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry," he said quietly to Velkari. "Yes. Did the future queen of an alien empire just point at me and call me her husband?" Velkari slowly lowered her drink. "Yes." Ethan stared across the room at the princess who had just claimed him in front of half the diplomatic leadership of the galaxy. "I feel like I missed an important meeting," he said. Across the pavilion, Princess Saralith began walking toward him. If Ethan Cole had learned anything during his years working around fragile satellites and unstable orbital machinery, it was that when something impossible begins moving toward you with absolute confidence, running rarely improves the situation. Unfortunately, that was exactly what his instincts suggested he do. Across the vast pavilion floor, Princess Saralith was walking directly toward him. The crowd parted before her like water around a moving ship. Nobles stepped aside, diplomats lowered their voices, and several royal guards subtly adjusted their positions as she passed. The silence that followed her spread outward, swallowing conversations and replacing them with a low murmur of whispers. Ethan suddenly felt very visible. "Velkari," he said quietly, "this seems like the part where someone explains the joke." The Thesrin ambassador folded her arms. "This is not a joke. Great. You may want to stand up straight." "I am standing up straight." "You look like you're apologizing to the floor." Ethan adjusted his posture slightly. It didn't help. The princess was closer now. From across the room she had looked elegant. Up close she looked dangerous. Not in a threatening way exactly, but in the way someone looks when they're completely comfortable commanding armies and star fleets. Her luminous skin caught the light of the floating lanterns, and the faint glow of her violet eyes seemed even brighter at this distance. Behind her, several Elendrin nobles followed at a cautious distance, whispering urgently among themselves. One of them, a tall figure with pale silver hair and long, curved ears, leaned toward another. "She cannot possibly mean that human." She said it clearly. There must be some ceremonial interpretation. What interpretation allows random humans to become royal consorts? Meanwhile, Ethan's brain was attempting to process approximately 6 different levels of confusion. He glanced at Velkari again. "You're sure she's talking about me?" "Yes." "Could she be pointing at someone behind me?" "No." "Could Elendrin marriage customs involve pointing at strangers and then explaining later?" "No." "Okay." The princess stopped a few steps in front of him. For a moment neither of them spoke. Saralith studied his face with quiet focus, as if confirming a memory. Ethan realized something strange then. Her expression wasn't triumphant. It was relieved, which somehow made the situation even more confusing. "You," she said calmly. Ethan nodded awkwardly. "Me." Velkari coughed softly beside him. Ethan quickly straightened. Your Highness." Saralith tilted her head slightly. "Ethan Cole." That made him blink. "You know my name." "Yes. Should I know yours?" Velkari nearly choked on her drink. One of the Elendrin nobles gasped quietly. Saralith, however, simply smiled faintly. "I would hope so," she said, "but I suspect you did not see my face clearly that day." Ethan frowned. "That day?" The nobles behind her began whispering more urgently now. One of them stepped forward cautiously. "Your Highness," he said, his tone carefully respectful. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before. Sarilith raised a single finger without even looking at him. He stopped speaking immediately. The princess returned her attention to Ethan. Several months ago, she said calmly, a damaged escape pod drifted into Earth's orbital traffic lanes. Ethan's brow furrowed. The memory stirred somewhere in the back of his mind. You were working outside orbital platform 12, she continued. Repairing a communication relay. Ethan blinked again. That happens a lot. The pod's stabilizers were failing. He hesitated. That part sounded familiar. Sarilith watched him carefully. You could have reported it to station control and allowed retrieval teams to handle it. Ethan slowly nodded. Yeah, that's the normal procedure. But instead, she said softly, you left your repair platform and manually intercepted the pod. Now the memory surfaced clearly, the cracked hull, the warning alarms. The way the escape capsule had been spinning slowly toward atmospheric burn. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Well, it looked like someone was still inside. Around them, several nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Sarilith continued. You secured the stabilizers using external magnetic clamps. Temporary fix. You remained attached to the pod long enough to redirect its trajectory. Ethan shrugged slightly. I didn't want it burning up on entry. One of the nobles spoke sharply behind her. You interfered with a classified Elendrin vessel. Ethan looked over. I saved someone in a broken life pod. That pod contained... Sarilith raised her hand again. Silence returned instantly. Her eyes never left Ethan. You spoke to the passenger through the damaged comm channel, she said. Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah, I remember that part. What did you say? He thought for a moment, then shrugged. I said the pod looked like it had better insurance than I did. A faint smile appeared on Sarilith's lips, and then I told them to hold on. The room was quiet again. Several diplomats watched the exchange with growing curiosity. Velkari leaned closer to Ethan and whispered, You saved her. Ethan blinked. I what? Before anyone could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the far side of the pavilion. An Elendrin security officer approached quickly, accompanied by 2 armored guards. He bowed briefly to Sarilith. Your Highness, forgive the interruption. Sarilith turned slightly. What is it? The officer's expression was tense. We have detected unauthorized signal activity inside the palace network. A ripple of unease spread through the nearby nobles. The officer continued. Our analysts believe it may be linked to the faction responsible for the assassination attempt 3 months ago. Ethan glanced back at the princess. Assassination attempt? Sarilith met his eyes calmly. Yes. Several guards around the room were already shifting positions. Diplomats began murmuring nervously. The officer lowered his voice. We believe they may have infiltrated the celebration. The pavilion, moments ago filled with polite diplomacy, now felt like a room waiting for something dangerous to happen. Ethan slowly set his glowing drink down. Okay, he said quietly, I'm starting to think this is not a normal party. Sarilith looked at him. No, she said calmly, it rarely is when you're married to the future queen. The first sign that something was wrong came from the lights. They dimmed, not completely, just enough that the floating crystal lanterns flickered, their soft silver glow trembling across the enormous pavilion ceiling. Conversations throughout the hall faltered again as diplomats and nobles glanced upward in confusion. Ethan looked around uneasily. That seems bad, he muttered. Ambassador Velkari had already set her drink down. Yes, she said quietly, very bad. Across the pavilion, Elendrin royal guards suddenly moved with coordinated precision. Energy spears hummed faintly as they activated, the glowing tips casting sharp reflections along the polished floor. Several guards sealed the massive crystal doors while others spread outward through the crowd. The security officer who had approached Sarilith spoke urgently into a small communication device on his wrist. Network breach confirmed, internal systems compromised. A cold tension crept through the hall, the kind of tension that appears when powerful people realize someone has just turned the room into a trap. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck again. Your Highness, he said carefully, I'm not a security expert, but this feels like the moment where someone should start evacuating. Sarilith didn't move. Her violet eyes were scanning the room slowly. They are already inside, she said calmly. That was when one of the musicians collapsed. The pavilion orchestra had been performing softly along the far wall, strange alien instruments that produced layered, almost ethereal harmonics. One of the performers suddenly dropped to the floor, the instrument clattering loudly beside him. Several nearby guests gasped. Then the musician stood up again, except he wasn't holding an instrument anymore. He was holding a weapon. It unfolded from a compact device into something long and angular, glowing with the unmistakable hum of charged energy. For a fraction of a second, the entire room froze. Then chaos erupted. Several other figures in the crowd moved at the same moment, throwing aside ceremonial robes and revealing concealed armor beneath. More weapons unfolded, sleek alien rifles and compact plasma emitters. Shouts erupted as diplomats scrambled for cover. Elendrin guards surged forward, energy spears igniting fully as they intercepted the attackers. Bright arcs of energy flashed across the pavilion. Ethan instinctively ducked. "Well," he said breathlessly, "that escalated fast." Valkyrie grabbed his sleeve and pulled him behind one of the massive sculpted columns. Blaster fire streaked across the hall, leaving glowing scars along the crystalline walls. Royal guards clashed with infiltrators in bursts of violent motion, their movements almost too fast to follow. But Ethan's attention snapped back to Seralith. She was still standing exactly where she had been. The attackers had seen her. One of them turned sharply, raising his weapon. Ethan didn't think. He moved. Later, people would say the human acted without hesitation. The truth was simpler. He just reacted the way he had reacted months earlier when he saw a broken escape pod drifting toward atmospheric burn. Someone needed help, so he moved. He lunged forward, grabbing the princess's arm and pulling her sideways just as a burst of plasma fire streaked past where she had been standing. The energy bolt slammed into the floor behind them, shattering a section of polished crystal. Several nobles screamed. Seralith stumbled slightly as Ethan dragged her behind the same massive column where Valkyrie was hiding. Ethan pressed his back against the cool surface, breathing hard. "That," he said between breaths, "was definitely aimed at you." Seralith looked at him. For the first time since entering the pavilion, her expression showed genuine emotion. Surprise. Around them, the battle was brief but violent. Elendrin royal guards were among the most elite soldiers in their empire, and once the infiltrators revealed themselves, the outcome became inevitable. Within moments, the attackers were either disarmed or pinned to the floor under glowing energy restraints. The pavilion slowly fell quiet again. The last weapon clattered to the ground. Smoke drifted lazily through the air from scorched sections of floor and shattered decorations. Ethan peeked around the column. "Is it over?" A guard across the room raised a hand. All infiltrators secured. The tension in the room slowly dissolved into shocked murmurs. Diplomats emerged cautiously from behind pillars and furniture. Nobles whispered to one another in stunned disbelief, and many of them were staring directly at Ethan. He noticed immediately. "That's a lot of staring," he said quietly. Valkyrie folded her arms. "You just tackled the future queen of an interstellar empire to save her life. I feel like tackling a princess should require paperwork." Seralith stepped out from behind the column. Her presence alone quieted the pavilion again. The nobles gathered cautiously around her, their expressions a mix of relief, confusion, and something else. Respect, one of the senior Elendrin advisors, spoke carefully. "Your Highness, you are unharmed?" Seralith nodded once. "Yes." Then she gestured calmly toward Ethan. "Because of my husband." The word echoed across the silent hall. The advisor blinked. Several diplomats exchanged startled looks. Ethan raised a hand awkwardly. "We should maybe revisit that label." Seralith turned toward him, her glowing eyes softened slightly. "You saved my life twice." Ethan shrugged. "You were technically inside the pod the first time." "Intent matters." The advisor cleared his throat. "Your Highness, the court will demand explanation." Seralith faced the assembled nobles. Her voice carried easily across the room. "Months ago, while traveling in secret after surviving an assassination attempt, my escape pod was damaged and left drifting in Earth's orbit." Several nobles nodded uneasily. They clearly knew the story. "An unknown human technician intercepted the pod," she continued. "He stabilized it long enough for my retrieval ship to arrive." Her gaze returned briefly to Ethan. "He did this without knowing who I was, without promise of reward, without hesitation." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. One noble spoke quietly. "That act invokes the ancient bond of honor." "Yes," Seralith said simply. Another noble frowned. "But to invoke it with a human," Seralith raised an eyebrow, "a human who has now saved my life twice." Silence followed that. Across the pavilion, Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "I should mention," he said, "I mostly just fix satellites." Velkari smirked. Apparently you also marry alien royalty. Several nobles began whispering among themselves again, but this time the tone had changed. They were no longer questioning the princess's declaration. They were reconsidering the human. Sarilith stepped closer to Ethan. The lantern light shimmered across her silver hair as she studied him again. "You still look confused," she said. "That's because I woke up this morning as a maintenance technician. And now?" He glanced around the enormous pavilion, the alien diplomats, the armored guards, the shattered floor where plasma fire had struck. Then he looked back at the glowing-eyed princess who had just declared him her husband in front of half the galaxy. "Now," Ethan said slowly, "I think I accidentally married an empire." For the first time since the chaos began, Sarilith laughed. And throughout the pavilion, many of the gathered aliens began to realize something remarkable. The quiet human they had barely noticed an hour ago had just become one of the most important individuals in Ellendrin history. Not because of power, not because of politics, but because when the moment demanded courage, he simply stepped forward.